Okay, so we're going, right? Okay, yesterday, hold on to the blind spot, we're not ready for that yet.
We are.
Be patient. Okay, yesterday we started chapter 3, sensation and perception. Sensation is how we take things in through our 5 senses, and then perception is what? How we perceive it, how we make sense of it after we've taken those things in. We talked about our perception of different pictures and how it would be different from each one of us. We talked about how dangerous it would be if we took in every bit of information and had to make sense of it. We talked about absolute thresholds yesterday, and these are in the book. We talked about these yesterday, but there's also a little chart in the book. You might want to look at those. Difference threshold is also known as the what? Just noticeable difference. The difference that you can tell between 2 stimuli. And we talked about Weber's law and the signal detection theory. And then we spent quite a bit of time looking at subliminal perception. Did we think that it was real? Is it used in advertising? Yes, we talked about hidden messages maybe in advertising, and then how some people may look at something and be able to see hidden messages in other things as well. We talked about the famous Coke experiment, using subliminal messages in the theater. We talked about not only visual messages, but sub-audible messages, where there is audio cues hidden in music, where they're supposedly giving us information, subliminal information that our mind is picking up on. We looked at some examples of backmasking in music, and how these supposedly subliminal self-help tapes, people may think that they help them lose weight or to quit smoking, but there were demonic messages in certain songs. We looked at Disney and some of people's allegations about hidden messages in Disney. We looked at that famous advertisement. Come back to this one here. Okay, here's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at the parts of the eye and discuss the visual pathway of the stimuli to the brain. So in other words, when we see something and our eye takes that stimulus in, what happens to it? Where does it go, and how do we make sense out of it? Where does the perception come from? We're going to look at some diseases and problems associated with declining vision. As you get older, it seems like 40 seems to be the magical age where maybe your parents or someone in your family, once they hit 40, their eyesight close up got bad. They could see far away, but close up it gets a little bit harder to read, and then they have to get reading glasses. We'll talk about things like that. We're going to talk about color blindness and the different types of color blindness, and we're going to do the blind spot experiment that you have there. We'll talk about after images, and maybe look at some optical illusions. Okay. These are the important parts of the eye, some of the important parts of the eye that we're going to be looking at. These are things that you've had in a biology class before, talking about the parts of the eye. You may have had to label an eye before. The pupil is what?
The eyeball.
The black opening that regulates the amount of light. And so sometimes it gets very small, and then sometimes it expands and is much larger, depending upon how much light is needed for your vision. The lens is the flexible and transparent part of the eye that changes shape. And then the retina is the innermost coating that's at the back of the eye. How many of you wear contacts? Okay, was that hard learning how to put something in your eye? Some people, that just freaks them out to think about having to put something in your eye, and to be able to take it out. Sometimes eyeballs are just being kind of gross, but anyway, they're very important for our vision. Okay, this is a diagram that shows light energy. There are lots of other rays that we cannot see, things like gamma rays, X-rays, ultraviolet rays, infrared rays, radar. Okay, this is the part of the spectrum that we can see, just only a very tiny part of the spectrum that we can actually visibly see to humans. Okay? Here's another example of what's called the electromagnetic spectrum. This is the part that we as humans can actually see. This step here is very important. I would highlight this there in your notes. This is very important stuff. Okay. So the visible portion of the electromagnetic spectrum is this part right here, what we can actually see. The colors that we see are different wavelengths. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. And we see color when light waves hit objects and bounce back to us at varying speeds. So, at the bottom, light is a form of electromagnetic radiation. And we've already talked about other types of radiation like radio waves, microwaves. Those are things that we cannot see. And then collectively it makes up the whole spectrum that was on this slide. Okay? This is the only small portion of that we can actually see as humans, visible to humans. Okay? Now, the wavelengths, the distance from the peak of one light wave to the peak of the next, these are different wavelengths. Right? The distance between those links determines the hue of the color of the light that we see. So, what's another word for hue? Like color or the shade of a color. So, depending upon how far apart these wavelengths are, determines the shade or the hue that we actually see. Make sure you know that. And then the intensity is the amount of energy in one of those light waves. And it's determined not by how far apart they are, but how high they get. This way, the height of each one. And the height of each one of those is what makes the color more intense or bright. I would highlight or underline bright. How intense or how bright is based upon how tall each of those wavelengths are. Okay. So, here's our eyeball. And here's all the different parts of the eye. And you've probably, like I said, in biology, anatomy, you've labeled an eyeball before. Here's our pupil. Here's where the light is being received into our eye. And then it follows a pathway we'll look at here in a minute. Here's the retina that's at the back. What is the nerve that leads to the back of our brain that helps us to see? Optic nerve. Be sure you know the optic nerve. And we're going to talk about the blind spot here in a little while. Also, within our eye, we have what are called rods and cones. Most of you are probably driving now. Do you like to drive at night? Some people have a hard time seeing at night. And it could be because the rods in their eye, those are the important ones for night vision. So there could be a problem with how they're receiving light at night and making sense of it in their rods driving at night. The cones are the ones that work best in the daylight. So here's a diagram of how they look. Here we have the rods up here, and the cones, and then more rods down. Okay, the blind spot. Have you ever been driving and not been able to see somebody come up beside you, and then all of a sudden you see them and it kind of scares you because you didn't even know they were there? It's not a good idea to drive in someone's blind spot. Sometimes on semis you'll see they have a sticker on the back that says, if you can't see my mirrors on the side of a semi, then I can't see you. So you need to move. You need to drive either forward or lay back some, because if I can't see you, then you're in a dangerous spot. Okay, from these examples that we have, let's look at this one first. This one. Okay. Okay, it says to hold it about 16 inches in front of your face. Close your right eye, and then concentrate your vision on the X at the top of the page, and then you move it until the circle disappears. So you're closing your right eye, just cover it up if you want to, and then with your left eye you're looking at the X, and you're moving it back and forth until the circle completely disappears. Did it do it? Yeah, look at the X.
Oh, wow.
We're getting
Really
this
slow.
slow. It works the other way.
It goes partially
See,
worse.
Okay? Yeah. Okay? Did it hurt, bottom right? Then, at the lower illustration, follow the same procedure where you're closing your right eye, looking at the X, and what happens to the line.
What?
Look at the bottom, just hope you don't,
Oh.
yeah. With your
Are you supposed to move it?
back this way, back and forth this way, not side to side. Do it slow, do it real slow. Do it real slow. And what happens to the line segment at the bottom? Does it connect or one part of it goes away? Yeah.
Yeah, this part.
Okay, the smaller segment goes away? Oh, you're doing that way too fast.
I don't know what I'm doing.
Okay, try the one that has the little car on it. It's the same type of thing. Where the optic nerve leaves the eye, there are no receptor cells. So this is what creates your blind spot. To demonstrate, close your left eye, look at the spot, and move the page a distance from your face, probably about 12 inches, at which the car disappears. So it's basically the same thing.
I see the
But
car.
move it back this, probably back and forth, or maybe side to side.
My right eye. Look at the right eye.
It did feel the same.
Two hearts and circles. She did it like back and forth.
You can even open your eyes.
Okay, so everybody found your blind spot, right?
Yeah. It's on my right side.
So be aware of that when you're driving, that you're not in someone else's blind spot. Be very dangerous. Okay, so in your PowerPoint notes, highlight the blind spot. Part of the retina where the optic nerve leaves the eye, that is where your blind spot is located. Okay, we'll talk about nearsighted and farsighted here in a second. Okay, the visual pathways to the brain, we talked about this a little bit before because it's very kind of strange that the input from the right half of the visual field strikes the left side of each retina and is transmitted to the left hemisphere. Remember we talked about being cross-wired before? So input from the right half of the eye strikes the left side of the retina and then goes to the left hemisphere of your brain. So we're going like this way, or we're going vice versa and going the other way. Same thing, vice versa. The input from the left half of the visual field, bless you, strikes the right side, and it's transmitted to the right hemisphere, which is in the green. Okay? Kind of odd that we're cross-wired, but it works. Okay, so if we follow the vision pathway, as we take in light, we take in images and stimuli from our eyes, here is the order that it goes. The rods and cones then send it to the bipolar, to the ganglion, to the optic nerve, and then that sends it to the thalamus area, which is called the LGN area, and then that's sent to the cerebral cortexes. And then where the optic nerve crosses that is called the optic chasm. When the optic nerve sends information to your brain, what lobe of the brain looks at our vision and tells us what it is that we're actually seeing?